Hello and welcome to the spin-off series, Design Killer AU. This was originally intended to just be a short filler episode to the Design series where the main character, John, inexplicably finds himself in an alternate reality with similar characters yet entirely different rules and scenarios. However, I've had so much fun writing this that I decided to take it up to a full-length season to fulfill the spin-off category. If you're not caught up on the Design series to Season 2, Part 5 or 6, many things will not make a lot of sense. If you haven't watched the series at all, first off, why don't you love me? Second of all, this series is basically its own entirely separate entity, but it feeds off the same lore built up in the first 2 seasons of Design. On the very basic level, this is just a murder mystery, so that will make perfect sense, regardless of whether or not you've seen the original series. But many of the rules and behaviors of some of the characters and the parasitic creatures called Left Hands will not be quite as easy to follow. I would highly recommend watching the original series first, but if you want to go for it anyway, stick around, you rebel you. You may notice some things seem strange at first. As an example, in many of my stories I use the same names. Both Design and A Cold Love Story feature girls named Sarah Duffy, for example, despite the fact that they are entirely different characters in their own plotlines. This series mixes and matches the various renditions of these characters, which may seem strange, and kinda like something that shouldn't be done, but is actually an integral part of the overarching plot. It will all make sense sooner or later, so without further ado, pay attention to the clues as they are presented, and let's start this. Welcome, welcome! The director beamed, standing in the middle of the gym as the school sat in the bleachers, half listening. I jerked awake, the gymnasium flooding into my vision as I thrashed lightly and looked around in horror. I was sitting next to Callie and Penny. Jesus, Penny laughed. You gotta stop dozing off, John. Dozing off? I groggily stammered before my eyes went wide and I met her face. My gaze rapidly darted between her and Callie, my mind flooding with memories. This was all wrong. Penny was dead. What was the director doing here? Why were we in school? Happy Halloween, the director continued. As your new principal, I would just like to say that it's a pleasure to see you all. His voice suddenly went dark as he grabbed the mic from its stand and pulled it close. But unfortunately, he continued, glancing up at the crowd and scanning it carefully, one of you is not like the others. He then lifted the mic into the air and called for Callie and I, gesturing us forwards. I glanced at Callie and then Penny, to see confusion written across both of their faces. Did they not understand what was going on either? Was this some kind of weird dream? I slowly stood, catching the concerned glances of several of my classmates. I cautiously stepped over people and made my way to the front. Callie did the same, but her dragging chains made it all the more difficult for her to maneuver. Along the way, I found myself stepping over Max and Mark. Both of their eyes went wide as they saw me, just as Penny's had. They were alive too? And together in the same school at the same time? This had to be some sort of hallucination, a delusive combination of my memories. Finally, at the front now, I stepped onto the stage and the director instructed us to turn around and face the audience. I watched the faces of everyone I knew stare back at me, confusion written across every one of them. Now, the director continued, these are 2 special guests, new transfers into your class, if you will. His voice died out as it echoed through the gymnasium. He slowly picked it up again, however, chilling everything with his next words. And they won't kill you if they don't have to, he continued confidently. Please treat them with respect and cooperate. For only one of you is guilty for not being who you say you are, what you say you are. The faces all grew concerned, but sheer confusion overwrote most of their emotions. Callie Ames, the director continued, or Subject 12, possesses 4 chain tendrils for the purpose of dismembering left hands without being affected by the empathetic feedback response. He gestured to her, nodding firmly and causing her eyes to go wide. She stared at the ground sheepishly, her face glowing red as the boards by her feet slowly warped and her chain tendrils snaked into the air, the speared tips maneuvering like hungry serpents. The crowd sat in stunned silence, horror rapidly spreading through their faces. Left hands, the director continued, are a special... well, let's not go into too much detail. The point is, they allow for matter distortion, of sort of telekinesis, if you will. The main point is that they're able to blend in perfectly with normal humans. Don't be fooled, though. They are monsters. I watched in horror as Subject 104 staggered to stand behind the director, her crimson eyes landing on me. What was she doing here? And John, the director continued, he's pretty much useless in every regard, aside from his immunity to distortions. My brow furrowed. Plus, he controls 104, the director continued. Due to this, he shall be in charge of carrying out the punishment. I rolled my eyes, suddenly and inexplicably understanding the situation. One of my classmates with a left hand pretending to be human trying to fit in. My goal was to find them and take them out before they could hurt anyone. Right? How did I know that? Why did this feel like some sort of strange alternate timeline? I awkwardly avoided the gaze of the crowd before turning to the director and quietly hissing out, "What the hell are you doing? This was supposed to be a secret, a stealth mission. What are you playing at?" "Ah, yes," the director spoke into the mic, grabbing my shoulder forcefully and turning me back around to the crowd. "A secret, John says. It's too bad then that the killer has already made their first move, eh? The secret's out of the bag." My eyes went wide. "Classroom 13A, the director continued. You'll find a body inside, painting the walls with gore. A murder that could only have been carried out by our culprit. You are all hereby forbidden to exit these grounds. The doors have been locked and sentries have been placed all around the perimeter. If you are the killer, you best fess up now. We can help you. Callie and John will begin the investigation in 5 minutes. If they have to find you on their own accord, you can bet we'll be far less understanding with your punishment." His eyes narrowed and the stunned crowd stared back at him, no one saying a word. "The victim is one Sarah Duffy," he continued. "She was last seen alive during 4th period, her math class, the same room she was murdered in. If anyone has any information to help this investigation, speak up now." Nothing. "You've likely already discovered that electronics do not work, unfortunately," the director continued. "The parasite seems to be emitting a sort of frequency to make cell phones useless within these walls. The security cameras and artificial lights are out as well, so don't think it will be that easy to pinpoint the killer. Usually we could rule out any male suspects, as the parasites only affect female hosts, but it seems that in this case, this breed of parasite is not gender-specific. It truly could be any one of you. I will reiterate one last time that if the killer speaks up now, we will cut you a deal. If you wait until we find you, you will be killed." Nearly a minute of petrified stillness passed before the director gnashed his teeth and spoke out. "Class dismissed. If that's your choice, so be it. Don't think you can hide forever, though." He fixed the microphone back to the stand and leaned on the podium before continuing. "You are all free to go anywhere within the school. However, you are only allowed to visit the crime scene if John or Callie allows you to. We do not have the time nor luxury for a fair trial. At the end of 24 hours, we will hold a hearing. If our investigators are unable to narrow down the suspect pool to the actual culprit by the end of the hearing, all suspects will be terminated by 104. You are guilty until proven innocent. The investigation starts now." "This is crazy," Mark cried, his eyes wide with fear. "John, what the hell is this? Who are you? Get us out of here!" His fist slammed down, his eyes darting between Callie and me. We were surrounded by the class, their horrified faces shifting uncomfortably, panic seeping through their eyes. I'm sorry," I stammered, putting out my hands. "This is for your own good, Mark. I didn't think the director would take it this far, but he's right. It really could be anyone in here. No one can leave. This is for your own safety. If we don't catch you—" "For our own safety?" he cried, his eyes vibrating to Callie's dancing chains in horror. "Trapping us in with Sarah's murderer? Some kind of telekinetic freak that already killed one of our classmates? This is insane! How is that for our own safety? What the hell happened to you, dude? You know me! Let me go!" "Yeah," Max spoke, backing up to stand behind Penny. "You know us, man. We're not murderers." Mark rushed forwards, his hands going to grab my shoulders as he shook me. "I have to get out of here, man," he cried. "John, you don't understand. I have nothing to do with any of this." "I know," I spoke, stumbling back and trying to peel his hands away. "I don't think it's you, Mark." "Then let me go," he screamed. "You heard what the director said. If someone in the class somehow suspects me, I'll be killed whether or not I'm actually the culprit. I don't want to die, dude." "I can't just let you walk," I shouted, feeling his hands press tighter. "But I promise you that you'll get out of this alive." "Bullshit!" he screamed, panic spreading through his face, turning heads from every direction. "We're all going to die!" The crowd began to feed off his panic, rising voices beginning to increase in volume as someone started to cry. "Callie," I spoke, my teeth gnashing in rage. "Stop him." His arms were slapped from my shoulders as the air cracked with distortions and several screams echoed through the crowd. His body tumbled across the floor violently before rolling to a stop. He groaned with pain, and all the faces grew dead, silent, terrified eyes tearing at my face. "You're not helping, Mark," I spoke. "The last thing any of these people need is for you to be freaking out. You think you're the only one who wants to leave. You think you're the only innocent one here? You're being a selfish ass." His wounded eyes glanced at me before falling away as he slowly staggered to his knees. "Everyone here is innocent," I continued, looking away from Mark and addressing the crowd as I met their faces. "And everyone wants to go home, see their families again, and live a normal life. Everyone but one." My eyes narrowed as I continued. "If they don't want to fess up, if they want to put everyone else in danger, that's fine, but it won't work." My teeth gritted. "If they think they can get away by hiding amongst the crowd, if they think they can escape this by letting innocent people die in their place, they are sorely mistaken." I slammed my fist down. "If you are innocent, you have nothing to be worried about. I promise you that you will not be harmed. You will all go home at the end of this." I searched the faces of the crowd, my voice solidifying. "By the end of 24 hours, I spoke loudly, my fists clenching, "I will have found the murderer." Silence. The crowd was dead silent, pale faces reflecting my own uncertainty right back at me. The oppressive stillness remained for some time before I slowly let my form relax. I turned back to Mark, taking an apologetic step towards him and offering my hand. "I'm sorry, dude," I stammered, wincing at a pained smile. "You shouldn't worry. He slapped my hand away, staggering to his feet and stepping back. He looked at me with blazing eyes, his breathing hard and ragged before he turned around and disappeared into the crowd, shoving his way past rigid, petrified forms. I sighed, further uncertainty shaking my heart. "Where?" I stammered before picking up my tone, putting on my facade as I spoke in a stronger voice. "Where is the first body? Who discovered it?" All was silent for some time before a quiet voice slowly spoke out. Me. it stammered, quiet and faint. I found it. I turned towards the voice and my heart dropped. Penny. Room 13A. I found it just before the director called the assembly, she stammered. I can show you if you want. I nodded slowly, letting out a big breath. All right, I spoke. Thank you, Penny. I found it when I realized I'd forgotten my calculator during class, Penny stammered, her eyes avoiding looking at the bloody mess painting the room as we stepped inside. I was in English class when I realized, so I had to wait until the end of that period to go back and get it. And you can confirm that she was in English class during the time of the murder? I spoke, looking at Max, who stood outside the room, refusing to go in. His eyes went wide, before narrowing in confusion. John? He stammered. Penny didn't answer the question, I spoke, looking to see that there was, in fact, a calculator in the room. Max said slowly before catching himself. Well, I mean, we have a 10-minute passing period, but I can confirm that she was in class when it started. That leaves a gap in her alibi, I breathed softly, turning back to Penny. Penny, do you know of anyone who could confirm your location at the time of the murder? John, she stammered. I was the one who reported the body. Why would I? So you don't, I sighed, my eyes cresting with worry. I was in the bathroom, she cried. I guess I can't confirm that, but... And you, Max? I spoke, turning to him. Penny can confirm that you were in class the whole time, but what were you doing during that passing period? He thought for a minute, panic spreading through his face before his eyes lit up and he snapped his fingers. I was with Mark, he cheered, relief flooding him. He can confirm that. Yes, Mark gnashed, avoiding my gaze. I was with him. We were in the halls talking about classes for next semester. All right, I spoke. That checks out. You two are off the hook. Can I go now? He hissed. Or do you still not trust me? Unfortunately, you can't leave, I stated slowly. I may need you for further information and testimonies during the trial. His brow furrowed, but I still watched light relief spread across his face. Penny just looked sick, her skin green and shifting with horror as I turned to her. Don't worry, I stated. Penny, you didn't do it. I'm sure of it. It could have been anyone else in the school. We just need more information. Like where Chris is, Max spoke, looking over his shoulder into the vacant hallway. Chris? I stammered. You haven't seen him recently? Nah, Max said. Not for a while. I don't usually hang out with him, but... That's right, Penny started, her eyes flicking downwards as she tried to recall the information. I haven't seen him since the murder. She looked to Mark and he met her gaze with a steely stare. Nope, he sighed after some time. You're right, I haven't seen him recently. He wasn't at the assembly either. I thought for a while, my hands running through my hair. That's pretty condemning, I thought out loud, but I find it hard to believe... John! Callie suddenly called from down the hall. Come look at this. I arrived to see her pointing to the sink in the girls' bathroom. I walked over to it and gazed over the bowl to see it. Blood. It was faint, just a light trace of pink on the underside of the white fixture. There were also several speckles on the floor. The rest seemed to have been scrubbed away in a hurry. The murderer tried to clean themselves off, I said slowly, looking in the drain to see more red liquid barely clinging on to the rim. So we can be sure it's a girl, Max stated slowly, looking around the stalls. I doubt the murderer would care about using the opposite gender's restroom, I started. It's true that if they were in a hurry, they would instinctively run to the bathroom they usually used, but they could also be trying to throw us off. Or perhaps the other bathroom had people in it. Like this one. I turned to Penny, seeing her eyes spark with recognition. I remember hearing the sink run for a really long time while I was in the stall, she exclaimed, rubbing her head. Yes, and I saw someone's shoes as they ran in here, but with our school uniforms, all of our shoes are the same. So that proves that the murder happened during the passing period, I stated slowly, but it doesn't really help with anything else. She could also be lying, Mark said from outside the room, his eyes narrowing. We know the murderer used this bathroom, and Penny is the only one so far to admit that she was alone in here. Penny's eyes went wide, sickness again corroding her features away as she glanced in horror at Mark. Hey, I snapped at him, cut it out. We're not just going to go around accusing each other. If you have some specific questions for her, go ahead. And if you have some information that would help, I would love to hear it. But no one is guilty of anything yet. You got that? He scoffed, rolling his eyes and turning away. Where are the clothes? Max said slowly. If the murderer really tried to wash them here, I doubt that it worked all that well. Surely they would have known that they couldn't simply wash out blood, and based on that crime scene, they would have been covered in it. You're right, I thought out loud. They would probably have destroyed the clothes after realizing it was hopeless. Or it's possible they hid them somewhere in the school. They would also have to get another uniform, Penny said. I don't remember seeing anyone running around naked. No, I pondered. But you also haven't seen someone at all. None of us have. Chris, Max agreed. You're right. Although, he wouldn't have killed anyone. Let's split up and search the school for the discarded clothing, I spoke. We need all the clues we can get. Penny and Max nodded in agreement before we all turned to Mark. He finally gave in and grumbled under his breath, agreeing to help. Nothing anywhere? If they're not in any of those places, I thought slowly, scanning Penny, Max, Callie, and Mark's faces. The only place left they would be in is the downstairs lockers, right? Or in the gym, Penny corrected. There were a lot of people in there. It's possible that they hid them during the assembly. Oh, that's still a lot of ground to cover, I sighed, rubbing my eyes. And we're already 8 hours down. We'll have to split up again. Penny, give me the master key and I'll check all of the downstairs lockers. Callie will check the gym. I looked at Callie for confirmation and she nodded. Wait, what? Max stammered. What about us? What should we do? Stay here and stay together, I spoke firmly. Don't forget that the murderer is still here somewhere. The minute you guys offered to help me, you became targets. Neither Callie nor I can be killed by left hands, making you guys the only vulnerable members. It's nighttime now, and since the lights are out, the killer could use the cover of darkness to strike. You guys need to stay hidden. I glanced into the inky hallway behind me, my eyes narrowing into the darkness. I saw something moving at the far end. I'll be back as soon as I'm done checking, I continued. Until then, you need to stay hidden here. Sleep if you can. Don't get separated. I'm cool with that, Mark scoffed. Mr. Invincible can go do all the dirty work. I'll take a nap here. He sprawled out across some chairs, kicking his legs out and instantly closing his eyes. Max rolled his eyes, but Penny just looked at me worriedly. Shouldn't we all stay together? She stammered, following me out of the classroom as I walked down the hall. I don't need sleep. We should... I'm sorry, I stammered, but we just don't have the time. I can't constantly be checking to make sure you guys are safe behind me. It's easier this way, and we can meet up tomorrow morning. Speaking of which, she stammered, why don't we just let the whole school know what we're looking for? I bet we would find the clothes within an hour if the whole school searched. No, we wouldn't, I said slowly. I thought about that too, but if the whole school searched, that would include the murderer, who could lie or easily cover their tracks in such a large group. We can't let any information we learn in this group escape to others. It's safer this way. Penny slowly nodded in agreement. You're right, she breathed. If you ever need me to write down any clues we find for memory's sake, my backpack is under the desk in the room we're hiding out in. I have paper and pencils. Although, if you don't want the information getting out, maybe we shouldn't write it down. Do you still have that frilly pink backpack? I laughed, smiling at her. Her face erupted in red as she stammered out, No, I got a new one. It's pretty much the same gross dark gray as the carpet now. I hate it. I chuckled before nodding at Callie, who started off towards the gym. There are a lot of people in the gym, I called after her. Just try not to let them know what you're looking for. The murderer could realize you're onto them and lash out. Pretend you're doing patrols or something. She nodded before continuing down the hall. I'll be back as soon as I can, I said to Penny, slowly turning and walking off. My stomach heaved in dread and I quickly covered my mouth. His torso was torn from his legs, which lay scattered across the room. A piece of his head was missing. The corner of a desk splintered into his skull, pinning him to the wall. Penny just stared blankly ahead in horror, her irises vibrating softly as her skin grew paler and paler by the second. Mark's eyes went wide, and for the first time his scowl dissolved from his face, being replaced by sheer terror. Victim number 2, I spoke eventually, nodding at Callie and the other 2 girls who had discovered the body with her. Max Haddock, age 18, undoubtedly killed by distortions, just like Sarah. The murder had to have occurred during the time interval Callie and I were gone looking for the clothes of the murderer. Unfortunately, we cannot narrow down the time any further. What a foolish thing to say, the girl beside Callie spoke, her pink-hued eyes scanning me up and down. Her long, bow-tied pink hair flopped down in 2 ponytails as she slipped her hand into the pocket of her risque uniform, several buttons undone, no undershirt visible anywhere. Several boys could be seen around the corner, staring her down and doing everything but outright catcalling her. She gave them a wink before turning back to me and presenting a blank sheet of paper. It appeared to be torn in half. It occurred within an hour ago, she spoke confidently. We can be certain of that. What? I stammered, looking at the paper. Who are you exactly? I've been following you and your group for a while now, she spoke, her eyes not leaving mine, her perfect skin radiating a sort of fakeness as she bit her lip and struck a pose. My name is Izzy, she dramatically announced, pointing her finger at our group. I'm the best detective around, and I've already figured out the murderer. And who would that be? I questioned, my eyes narrowing. How can we trust you? I followed Callie into the gym, having already figured out myself that it was likely where the culprit stashed the clothes, she stated, waiting for a confirmation nod from Callie, which she got. I asked if I could aid her in her search, Izzy continued, and yet we were unable to uncover anything despite my superior investigation skills. She slowly unfolded the paper before continuing. But I did find another clue, one that pinpoints the time of Max's murder. I looked at her questioningly, and she met my confusion with a huge grin before turning to Penny and stating, Penny, give me Max's last note. Max's last note? I asked, looking at Penny, whose face grew pale. Just what exactly happened here? We were all sleeping, Mark shook, his panicked eyes darting to me. When I woke up at one point, Max was gone, and I watched Penny put down the note before standing up again and walking out of the room. Penny's eyes went wide, her hands splaying out in front of her. I was just putting down the note after reading it. Max said he was going to look for you, John, but didn't want to wake us. I went outside to look for him. I told you guys to stay together, I cried, running my hands through my hair before taking the half piece of paper from her and reading it. Went out to look for John, it read. Didn't want to wake you. Be back soon. Seems a bit off, doesn't it? Izzy cheered before putting her hand out in front of me, her pink nails matching the rest of her attire. I gave her the note cautiously, watching as she fit it with the blank half piece of paper she already had. It fits perfectly, she stated, proceeding to show us. The seam did in fact line up exactly. Where did you get that other half of the paper? I questioned. A friend gave it to me, she stated. On my way back from the gym with Callie, she said that a strange silhouette had entered her room when she was trying to sleep and ripped the piece of paper, taking one of the halves. She reported it to me, like I told her to if anything unusual happened around her. Callie nodded and spoke. I can confirm that she's telling the truth. And my friend had several other girls with her, Izzy continued, all of whom share the same story. A strange figure entered at precisely 12:33 a.m. according to their accounts. If Penny is telling the truth, it means that Max was killed after that time, as he had to have been the one to write the note after stealing that piece of paper. Her eyes again flashed with bright pink as she struck another over-the-top pose. Except, she continued, Penny isn't telling the truth. Penny's irises shrunk into horrified pinpricks as she took a step back. What? She stammered. Yes, I am. The murder occurred before the note was ever written, Izzy conjectured, and Max wasn't the one to write it. She pointed her finger at Penny and flaunted her hair. You were. No, Penny screamed, her hands clawing at her sides. I didn't. It was there when I got back. Her eyes went wide, her hands slapping to cover her mouth in horror. Got back? I asked, my heart dropping. Penny? Got back from where? John, she stammered, her deep blue eyes growing sick with terror. You have to From murdering Max, Mark cried, taking a step back from Penny. I knew it. I knew it was you all along. No, Penny screamed, her spindly limbs shaking as she whirled around. It wasn't me. Admit it, you coward, Mark cried. You killed your best friend, you monster. I found his body, Penny screamed, sinking to the ground. But I didn't write the note, and I didn't kill him. He was gone when I woke up, and when I went to look for him, I found his body like that. I ran to tell you, Mark, but when I returned, that strange note was there. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out. I knew you guys wouldn't believe me, and I was again the only one without an alibi for discovering a body. I decided not to tell anyone and hoped someone else would find the corpse. When I saw the note, I went outside to look for you, John, but was stopped by Callie and these two girls who had discovered it minutes after me. Interesting story, Izzy spoke, but you have nothing to prove what you're saying. You killed Max, then wrote the note. All the facts point to you as the culprit. Fess up now, or be even more embarrassed by the world's #1 detective. You're wrong, I suddenly cried, turning to Izzy, causing her eyes to flash to me in rage. You're forgetting an important detail, I cried. Penny's backpack was in that room. I turned to Penny, meeting her pleading eyes. Penny, I continued, you said you had paper and pencils in your backpack, right? Yes, she stammered. I have my spiral notebooks. She would have known that, I cried, causing Izzy's eyes to narrow. There would have been no need for her to do something so risky as to enter a different classroom to steal some paper if she could have just gotten it from her own backpack. Her backpack is hard to see, it's the same color as the carpet, and if it was under a desk in the darkness, the culprit wouldn't have seen it. Izzy gnashed her teeth, her perfect skin flushing red as she slammed her fists against her side and went rigid. Her pink irises flashed angrily to the girl behind her, the other one to discover the body with Callie. The girl stood, utterly still and calm against the far wall, looking on like some kind of indifferent specter as her steely gray eyes drifted with the light turquoise. Her uniform shirt was open, a black shirt underneath, with what looked to be a heavy military belt holding up her skirt. Despite her utterly composed demeanor, her short black hair was almost comical as it spiked out from her head in a slightly ruffled mess. "Well, Lilith?" Izzy called to her. "You're the one who told me that Penny did it. What do you have to say to that? You just made both of us look like idiots." The girl said nothing, her dark eyes merely flicking to meet Izzy's gaze and causing her to wilt in her stance. Izzy winced and nearly backed down before she quickly regathered her energy and screamed out, "Huh? Are you really that dumb? Answer me!" Her pink ponytails flopped in rage. "I did not say Penny was the culprit." The figure finally spoke in a chilling, cold voice, her turquoise eyes lighting up. "I merely followed the group and stated the facts about the present situation. It was you who jumped to that conclusion." Izzy snarled, gnashing out, "Well then what good are you? I never should have asked for your help." The girl just looked away, calm and cool as she surveyed the gathering crowd. "Lilith, was it?" I spoke, addressing the figure, causing her eyes to flick to me. Half expecting it, I still wasn't fully prepared for the way her turquoise rings burned into my flesh with a stare that carved through the air. She nodded softly. "If it was you who followed our group and told Izzy all of those things," I continued, "it's pretty impressive that you were able to gather all those facts. I'm sure you've already figured out what we need to do next." The girl nodded, her eyes locking with mine. The next rational step would be to search Max's locker for a written assignment of his to compare to the handwriting on the note. She spoke, effortlessly standing up from the wall. "It will offer more clues as to Penny's apparent guilt or innocence." Izzy just slammed her fists down, rage boiling up to her head. "That's what I was going to say!" she shrieked, crossing her arms. "If the writing on the note doesn't match Max's handwriting, Penny is the culprit for sure. I knew it! I'm never wrong. This will get her for sure." I sighed and fumbled around in my pockets for a bit before producing a key and speaking. "I still have the master key to all of the lockers. Let's go check Max's for any assignments he may have left over in there." We began walking towards the downstairs lockers, but as the boys from before tried to swarm Izzy, she lashed out angrily, kicking one of them in the gut before slamming his head against a locker. "Not in the mood," she hissed, causing the other boys to scramble back in horror. I looked to the back of the group to see Lilith following along from a slight distance, as if she were still spying. As we passed the downed kid who was clutching his head in agony, she stooped down and helped him to his feet. He thanked her profusely, but she just gave a single nod before continuing to follow us. It was at this point that a sudden, blood-curdling scream echoed through the hallways. We all looked at each other before rushing in the direction of the erupting chaos. Aw, yeah, it's not even only one part. We're only halfway done. God dang it. Also, more people are gonna die. Spoiler alert. Oh, and if you guys have any ideas of who did it, based on the clues you've heard so far, I would love to hear it in the comments. If you bring up a good enough point, I could even include it in the story. Haha. Alright, well, see you next time to find out who done it.